Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happiness Index podcast. My name is Matt Phelan, and I'm here with Hannah today. How are you doing, Hannah?
Yeah, really good, thank you.
Hannah, and please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. I'm Hannah Thompson. I'm currently Chief People Officer at Fosse, which is a talent solutions business. I've been in the people space for, coming up to kind of 15 years now. Really started out my career in kind of large multinational corporate businesses. And then kind of in the last 10 years have been involved in more founder-led startup and scale-up businesses. So yeah, really excited to see what we uncover today.
So, Hannah, we get people from CEOs to people just starting their career. Listen, there's going to be lots of people, lots of HR people listening on different parts of it. Some of them are their dream is to be a chief people officer.
Mm.
You got any have you got any tips for anyone listening that's just starting out their career and thinking, yeah, I want to be where Hannah is?
It's so interesting because we were having this conversation this morning. We had internally a roundtable about women in leadership, and we
Yeah.
had a mixture of people at all different levels. And I was being asked, kind of, how did I get to my position, and what advice would I have for my younger self? And I think if I reflect back on my career, um, I was someone that was naturally quite curious, probably nosy, should we call it?
Yeah.
And so I very much was really interested in what was happening around me, and often probably asked questions and asked to be involved in meetings that I probably shouldn't have been at my level.
Yeah.
But it was a really good way of me kind of immersing myself and understanding how business operates, but also what was going on. And I think using that ability to just shadow and offer to take notes or offer to, pull a deck together means you get a lot more exposure to the business.
Yeah.
And I really use that to then be able to play that back to the business and the problems they had and what solutions I had to help kind of move that on. So I'd really encourage anyone that's looking to kind of get to kind of the leadership level in HR is to continue to be curious, ask to come along to meetings, and just spot opportunities to contribute to that conversation.
I think it's a really good point there because I think people underestimate if you just say, "Can I just come and watch?" or "Can I just come and listen?" how many people will say yes. There is
Yes.
one thing I'd like your advice on though, because when I was in my first job, I had that curiosity, and then the MD of the company, it was a small company, called me in one day and he said, "Matt, do you know what the problem is with you?" And I thought, "Oh, great."
Great way to start conversation.
Yeah. And then I asked a question. I said, so obviously I was really young, and I was like, so what's that? And he said, you asked too many questions. And I said, I then embarrassingly asked the question. I said, so what's the issue with that? And he said, if you ask lots of questions, then people will know that you don't know the answers.
Mm.
I was young at the time, so I thought maybe this guy was smart. It took me a lot of time to realize this guy was basically just an idiot.
Mm.
But it definitely dented my own confidence in asking and being curious. So
Yeah.
I'm asking for myself. I'm also asking for the listeners.
Mm.
I think a lot of people thinking, yeah, no, I am curious, but they fear to ask questions sometimes. So I've got two questions for you. Have you always been curious, and or has that been nurtured by someone in your life, or as a child, or in your career? So that's the first part.
Mm.
We'll kick off that. Have you always been curious, or has that been nurtured by someone?
Uh, I think I've just been naturally curious. And I think curiosity doesn't always mean asking questions. It can be coming along and observing and people watching and earwigging and listening in. So I think um I think it's absolutely fine to ask questions. And if it's from a point of I'm really keen to learn, I'm really keen to understand, I actually don't I don't think that's a bad thing. But I also think there's times, if I think about in my early career, and I think where COVID has really hindered perhaps people coming through in their careers, is that ability to just come along to a meeting and observe or offer to take kind of notes or just listen in. Because you can build quite a picture. You can see different dynamics in the room. You can see how people communicate. You get a better sense of what's happening in the business around you. You don't need to say a single thing. And you could even open it by saying, like, I'm just here to observe. And
Yeah.
it gives you such a much richer insight as to what's happening in the business. So I think curiosity doesn't necessarily need to be always asking, always talking.
It's a really good distinction. And what if someone's listening and they're thinking, okay, I've taken on what Matt was doing, I've adapted it to the way Hannah's doing it, and actually don't always have to be asking questions. But then there's a final leap of confidence where there's a meeting where they want to ask the CEO, do you mind if I just come along? How any tips to get over that confidence to ask or to
Yeah,
put your hat in the ring?
I think it's all about the relationships you build outside of the meeting rooms, the formal meetings. So it's taking what you've learned in those formal spaces and then having follow-up conversations or dropping an email being like, I was really appreciative to observe that conversation. Some
Yeah,
of the reflections I've had are XYZ. Would love to pick your brains on that if you ever have 5 minutes. And I think as you become a leader, you want to pay that forward. I certainly want to pay that forward. I've had people that have approached me on LinkedIn or internally within a company that's like, I'd love to just pick your brains on that. And I think, wow, that's a gift that I would love to pay forward because
yeah,
I've had that in my career and it's helped to contribute to where I am today.
love that. So yeah, let's stay curious. Uh,
Mm.
what makes you happy, Hannah?
Yeah, I we're just talking, kind of getting ready for this call. I'm relatively simple, right? For me, it's work life is so frantic, so busy,
Yeah,
um, that I really appreciate and value slow time with my husband and my daughter, and just simple pleasures make me happy. Waking up to this beautiful spring sunshine that we've been having, or I live quite near the forest, so walking through the forest, or being on a beach with the sun go down and often a drink in my hands and kind of just taking stock of slow time is
yeah,
what makes me happy.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Hannah, why do you try and shake the HR tag? Like you're obviously a successful HR professional. But you
Mm.
take the tag off a little bit. Talk us through about what you mean by that.
Yeah, really happy to. And it's relevant because I'm recruiting at the moment for my number two at La Fosse, and I've been interviewing people, and I often start the conversation by kind of in my mind, there's a scale of HR, and at one end of the scale, you've got this kind of old school image of HR, the policy police, the computer says no, we kind of slow things down, we put process in for process sake. And that I don't think anyone joins HR because they want to be part of that image. It's certainly that's something that I've been trying to kind of fight against. I think at the other end of the scale, you've got kind of probably more progressive thinking, really thinking about what's the future of work, how can we as people leaders design what that looks like, and really thinking about people as a product and really designing our people strategy with employees through the lens of kind of consumers,
Yeah.
and that there isn't necessarily a one size fits all. So I really love surrounding myself with both people that I hire and I work with, but also going out and events on people who are perhaps towards more of that progressive end of the people agenda.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love that. And when we got into the HR tag, employee experience was an important part of how you view the world of work. Like, why is employee experience, in your opinion, important for for building an amazing company?
Yeah, I think employee experience for me initially evokes that kind of emotional side, of the people agenda. So if we think about the employee life cycle, employee experience for me is how do we want people to feel when they go home from their first day at their first job of their new job? What's that emotion they want to be talking to their friends or their partner about in terms of what it means to, I really feel like I've joined an amazing place. I'm so excited. When employee experience goes wrong, it's like, oh my goodness, they didn't even have, the basics ready for me. Like I was on my own all day. Right through to I think in the people strategy, there's times when we have to have, tough conversations, whether that's restructures or performance. Again, how we treat people in those situations is employee experience. And
Yeah.
it's the difference between um, unlocking someone's potential and treating them like humans and getting them to where they need to be, but also where we need to be as a business,
Yeah.
to people walking away with kind of a negative connotation. Now
Yeah.
that might sound kind of quite fluffy. I think the commercial part of that is how do we unlock employee experience to drive business performance and business growth? Um, and I think for me, that's a blend of really understanding our employees as people and
Yeah.
what are their different needs, and not taking that kind of one size fits all approach, but also really trying to understand what's the direction of travel for the business, where are we heading, and
Yeah.
what could we do differently from a people strategy perspective to unlock that growth and that potential.
In terms of, you talked about like employee experience being a valuable part of performance.
Mm.
Have you encountered anyone in your career? Because this comes up a lot at like our HR brunches and dinners and things like that, where they're just working with someone who just doesn't get the fact that the two are linked. They think that they're these separate islands, that the employee experience is this thing that HR do, and performance is something that the serious business do. I'm just kind of paraphrasing a couple of conversations that happened at our last HR brunch. Have you
Mm.
encountered any people in your career that have not been able to say to see the link, or have you had people that it's a bit tenuous and you've helped them see the link?
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been in conversations either as part of kind of interview processes or at roundtables and events where um they feel that the employee experience, as I said, is the fluffy part of HR. It's fluffy, it's just, thoughts and feelings, and it doesn't really amount to anything in terms of kind of outputs or outcomes. And then you dig into it and you say, okay, well, what's your engagement like? What's your attrition like? Are you finding it hard to hire into those roles? What's your employer brand? What are people talking about you on LinkedIn or on Glassdoor about? And you start to see the penny drop to say, actually, the beauty of employee experience is if you really hone in on it, it starts to drive your bottom line. It
Yeah.
starts to mean that you can attract, retain, and engage incredible talent. And so I think it takes a bit of kind of work to kind of dig into that and get them to see actually there's some KPIs around their business performance, which if they pivoted their employee experience, it might get to those outcomes a lot quicker.
Yeah. And what happens if you ignore it? Like, what happens if you just ignore employee experience?
For me, it's the opportunity cost, right? It's not focusing on it means you're constantly rehiring. You're not getting the most out of your employees because they're not happy. And let's face it, unhappy employees aren't as productive. They're not going to put that discretionary effort to be more innovative and go that extra mile. So I think there's a financial lens of not doing it. And sometimes, with employee experience, we're looking at it, the Fosse at the moment, our benefits, our policies. There's costs attached to that, but it's
Yeah.
like you have to spend a little to get a lot back in terms of kind of productivity and engagement. So for me, I would be challenging those who don't believe it has a commercial lens to think about, well, what's the cost of us not investing in it?
Can I add a little interim question in here in between the question I was supposed to ask you, which is, can you just talk us through, you mentioned LaFosse there. What's the ownership structure of LaFosse?
Yeah, so we are employee owned, which is really exciting. It's quite rare in the UK still. I think there's probably about 1,200 employee owned businesses in the UK. And you think, gosh, there's millions of businesses in the UK. So it's still quite a minority group. But as a chief people officer, what a privilege to have employee ownership as a vehicle to really motivate and inspire and engage our employees. So what that means is that we collectively, all of our employees, whether you've been here for 15 years or you've been here for a day, own part of our business in what's called an employee ownership trust. So 51% of the business is owned by employees, and the other 49% is owned between our founder and some of our employees based on kind of tenure and seniority.
Yeah. And for anyone listening wants to get into it, just by coincidence, I wish could say that I planned this. We just did a webinar on the details of an employee-owned business. So if you go happiness-index.com, it's me interviewing someone who took on the running of employee-owned business, which is a gas engineering business down in Cornwall. It's
Mm.
the person who runs the body of it and a consultant who encourages people, because I came off it, you'd mentioned it to me, Hannah, about employee owned, and
Mm.
then I was asked to host this webinar, and I'm just a complete convert for employee owned business. So if you go to the happinessindex.com, go to the events and webinars bit, and the listeners have a listen.
Put it out.
But going back to your point, you touched on it a little bit, but what's it like being an employee in an employee-owned business? Because you're chief people officer, but you're also an employee. Like, what is it?
You know what? I in my career can't say that I have been in a business like Fosse that is so laser focused in terms of the direction of travel. So what that means for us is there's a real internal alignment around who are we, what do we stand for, and what are we going after over the next kind of 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing opportunity to bring a collective effort behind an agenda, because actually it's ours to win or lose. The only thing that's going to stop us getting in our way is our own individual agendas, which I think you tend to get in a lot of businesses, right? Everyone's got their own agenda of why they're at work and what they're going after. So what employee ownership does is to say our role is to nurture and grow the culture of the business, but also make this business the most valuable it could be.
Yeah.
Because if it's valuable and we increase our enterprise value,
Yeah.
each and every one of us, regardless of tenure or seniority, are going to benefit from that. And it's quite rare to be able to offer that out to individuals beyond your usual kind of salary and perhaps bonus or commission structures.
Yeah.
So it's a really good way for us to engage our employees.
Yeah. I think it's another step on at the Happiness Index. We have a scheme where people have share options in the business, but this is another level on. And even the where people have share options, it feels like the difference between renting a flat and owning a flat. Obviously, once you own it, people take extra little care about those little things, like making sure the laptop doesn't get damaged, through to caring about what the employee brand looks like on Glassdoor and things like that. But I guess this is just the same, but it got extra power behind it.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, we're 2 years into our journey, so we haven't absolutely cracked it. We're really clear in terms of where we want to go. But we're transitioning from a founder-led business. We've had a hugely successful business under our founder to employee ownership. And that's a real mindset shift. And that's cultural change. That takes time. It's not going to be a shift overnight. But it is what comes with it is a greater level of transparency. Everyone now is a shareholder, so really wants to know how we're performing as a business, how we do financially against our targets, what can we individually do to help move us further along, what's holding us back.
Yeah.
What it's created is not only the financial benefits, which are more longer term, but in the short term, greater transparency, greater innovation, greater curiosity, which I talked about at the start.
Yeah.
And a real level of pride as to who we are and how that sets us apart in our industry.
You're right. I can totally imagine it, because when you meet someone at the weekend, you are an owner of that business versus an employee.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's again back to that kind of discretionary effort. What can I do in my role that's going to help us move further along in terms of culturally or business performance?
Yeah.
Whereas before people see it maybe as a 9 to 5, and it's only a 2-year gig, and I'll move on to my next thing. People are locked in for a lot longer here.
I don't normally quote Gary Vee, but I am about to quote Gary Vee, which is, he always has a go at founders that moan that their employees won't put in as much effort or commitment as a founder. And Gary says, well, if you want that, you've got to give them the same amount of shares as you've got.
Yes. Yeah.
Being owned is a way of doing that without having to go down the Gary Vee route. So I can totally see how that would work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some stats around. So we are part of the Employee Ownership Association, and they have some stats around employee-owned businesses are increased productivity by 12%.
Yeah.
They see, I think it's a 25% uplifting engagement. Like, there's financial reasons to get behind it as much as cultural and kind of from an innovation perspective as well.
Yeah. And hopefully very soon, with that particular body, we're going to be finding out whether employees are happier in employee But considering you're part of that group, turns out we might be talking about yourself, Hannah, when we do that.
Yeah.
Employee voice, I just want to make a distinction for our customers at this thing. Employee voice is a product within the happiness index that measures how your employees are feeling. Hannah and I talk not about the product, but principally the voice of the employee. What? Which there is a tech solution to it, but you don't have to use tech to get the voice of the employee. I always say that as a tech owner. Why is employee voice important, Hannah?
Yeah, it's so important for me. Whether actually I was working as CPO in employee-owned business or not, I think there is huge benefits in terms of getting employees to contribute to what the solutions are for our business. No one knows better than the pain points and what we could do differently than those in those roles. So when I joined Fosse 18 months ago, I remember, I think it's day 3, I walked into our CEO's office and I said, right, I'd like to make my first hire. And he's like, whoa, hang on a minute, you've not even got through your first week. But for me, the first hire to be had was someone to head up internal communications, because I genuinely don't think you can preach about employee experience if you aren't strong in communication.
Yeah,
And that's both internal communication as well as externally, and making sure that those two are in sync. And so employee voice fits into that kind of communications piece for me, and that engagement piece, because you get much more diverse thinking, much more innovation, a lot more ownership and proactivity and drive if individuals feel like they are being heard, that their ideas and suggestions are being acted on, and that they've got license to kind of run with those, versus the senior leadership team or the people team designing policies, benefits, initiatives, strategies,
yeah.
room behind closed doors that just aren't going to kind of land with the people.
Hannah, you've worked in employee-owned business and non-employee-owned businesses. When you're doing employee voice at the Fosse, it's also owner voice, isn't it? Because they own the business.
Yes.
Have you noticed any differences?
Yeah, I think, initially, I'm pleased to say my request for an internal comms person did get signed off, and we worked really closely together in those first couple of months. And the practices we put in place were an employee panel. So that's representation of employees from across our business from different divisions, and they are there to surface up ideas coming out of their teams, but also to be a communications tool when we're making decisions at an exec board level. They're our kind of pilot group to go, how's this going to land? What are the things we should think about? And so we've also launched a kind of Ask Me Anything, where people submit questions anonymously on Slido that our leaders answer. And so employee ownership and employee voice has meant that we have had much richer kind of insights and ideas than perhaps we would have done previously. And I think it has really driven engagement. But I think some of the challenges we've had with that is because it was the first time in a long time we've asked people for, what are your ideas and suggestions?
Yeah.
You initially get why can't I get a working plug in any of the meeting rooms? Why have we got moldy bananas in the fruit bowl?
Yeah.
There aren't enough biscuits, on a Monday.
Yeah, I'm saying that regularly.
Exactly. So you get that kind of initial hygiene factor of questions.
Yeah.
And I think, some of our leaders were a bit like, really, is this what it's become? It's become a kind of, let's complain about this, or that, and the other. But actually what we found was that was temporary. And what people really appreciated from our employees was that we were tackling those kind of hygiene factors, answering them, giving honest opinions, getting them resolved, because half the time it was probably not even making its way up to leadership. And so once we initially got through that kind of initial stage of bit of whinging, bit of moaning, the level and the quality of questions we've got now are much more through the lens of, I'm an owner of this business. I'm really curious to understand that strategic project that we've invested in. What's the outcome? How can I get involved?
Yeah.
And so we've seen a real shift in the quality and the emotional investment in how the business is performing.
Yeah, and anyone who wants to see in action what Hannah's talking about, go and watch the first episode of Ted Lasso. Have you watched that, Hannah?
Yeah. It's incredible.
And people may or might not like that sitcom, but this happens. This happens at every company that we work with at Happiness Index, which is there's a building of trust that needs to happen before people will raise the big things. And in the first episode of Ted Lasso, it's fixing the shower. But it's those little things, and exactly how you said, like some of the senior people, we see that all the time where they're like, "Oh, is this really what it's about?" Because and there's a danger of getting into your ivory tower there, where you think the problems that the people have got on the ground are insignificant. But we always see, and we say that to our new customers, when these little small things come in, they are there. It's even better if they're small because often they're easier to fix. Like
Yeah.
moldy fruit is one of the easiest things to fix, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, go and homework for everyone. Go and watch the first episode of Ted Lasso to get what Hannah's talking about here. But this also leads me on to there's a first bit there where some senior people often see it only as small things, but then there's often what we call like the employee voice hump where it it sort of loses a bit of momentum. We have that with some of our customers that they might be doing. It might be year two, it might be year two, it could be year five sometimes where they lose a bit of momentum behind it, and everyone's a bit like, "Oh, we're doing this for a long time," and they lose the will want to do it at the beginning. Any tips on how to get through that?
Yeah, again, as I said, we're kind of early into that journey here at Fosse, but certainly in other organizations, I think it's closing the loop on that feedback. I think there's nothing worse as a people leader to go out and ask for lots of feedback, whether that be your engagement survey, whether that be in town hall meetings, and then nothing happens with that feedback, and it kind of goes into a black hole, or is it Excel spreadsheet that's buried on your desktop. So what we try and do regularly is, this is what we've heard, this is what we're doing about it, or this is what we're going to do about it, or actually we can't do something about it right now, but this is why. And I think people really understand, respect, and whether they are happy with it or not, they understand the rationale as to, okay, well, it's not just it disappeared. There's a reason behind it. There's I'm improving my commercial acumen as to why we can't, we haven't got a blank check, we can't do everything all at once. I think it has done a lot in terms of building trust and credibility, that they're being heard, they're being listened to, and they're getting answers to that. So I think often when you get that slump, it's because there's this kind of void or vacuum of information of like, we talked about that, but where's it gone? What's the follow-up? What's happening with it?
Yeah. No, thanks, Hannah. It's really helpful. We've got the last question, but I'm going to add another extra question that's come in since then with conversation that I was having, which is, we know that psychological safety is one of the top drivers of happiness, right? And the question I've got is, what's the best way to get trust as a leader? So, and someone was saying this recently in one of our discussions around, they're a new manager and they want to make people feel safe in their team, but you can't just say to someone, "Oh, be safe with me." Like, so the first bit, I'm going to make it two parts now. How do you make someone feel safe, firstly, and then over time, how do you build trust? So I made it a two-part question. So let's start with safety. If you're meeting one of your team for the first time, how can you make them feel safe?
I think there's a couple of things. As leaders, I think we can sometimes do a lot of talking. And actually what we need to do is listen. We was talking to, again, someone this morning around kind of like the levels of listening. There's listening to, find a gap in the conversation to just put your point across. And then there's listening to understand and to ask questions, and not even offer solutions, just to sit with that and go, God, that must be really tough. Like, I'd love to learn more. Or, how can I help you there, versus jumping in with the solutions. I think there's also a role for us to role model not having all the answers, showing a bit of vulnerability, showing when actually like things haven't gone to plan, and actually just bringing a bit of humanness into leadership. I think that makes people more open to opening up, because
Yeah.
they can see that actually you haven't got the answers, you haven't completely got it cracked, and I think that builds a lot of trust.
So I've got to add another question now, Hannah, because you made me think of one, which is this is another one that came up on vulnerability.
Mm,
So we broadly, and I agree, showing vulnerability is a really important thing to do as a leader and so on. Someone actually said on one of our forums, my manager is so vulnerable, I'm starting to worry that they're incompetent at their job.
oh gosh. Mm,
And then they started this whole conversation where they were like, there's a bit of showing like, oh, I'm not sure this is going on, but it led into this conversation of other people saying the same, which is their manager was oversharing so much.
mm,
We're starting to go, can this person actually do their job? Is there a
yeah.
balance somewhere in there? And is there a line? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a line. I think it's probably understanding the forums and the audience to be able to tweak that level of vulnerability. You need to show that it's okay to not have all the answers or to make mistakes. And it's like, how do you fail forward and learn from it? I think being completely open with everything that's not working, that's not going right. Negativity can breed negativity, and it can mean you lose your audience. So I think showing vulnerabilities is showing that it's not okay, and not every day is going to be a 10 out of 10 day.
Yeah.
But it's having the humility to learn from it and to kind of open that up without kind of completely exposing that it's not going well at all. um, and finding the right kind of forums to be having those conversations.
Yeah, I love that, Hannah. I wish you'd been in there in that conversation, but I can now send the people this link and say,
Yeah, absolutely. Get in touch.
so what's the best way? We touched on it a little bit here, but what's the best way to earn trust as a leader?
So for me, we touched on it a little bit in terms of just spending time kind of listening and really understanding what's going on. I think asking questions versus jumping into kind of solution mode, really empowering others to identify solutions and give them a go and pilot that. And really kind of champion that diverse thinking. So making sure that actually you're paying attention to those who might not be speaking up in a meeting or might not be contributing, and not always putting them on the spot, but inviting them to get involved in the conversation. I think that shows empathy and emotional intelligence as a leader.
Yeah.
And often those that aren't speaking up the loudest sometimes have the brightest ideas, and are finding it difficult to kind of find that space to speak.
We see that when we model companies, if you get a company where that people are happy but not engaged, you get lots of people with loads of energy running around in circles without direction. Where companies where people are engaged but not happy, you get a bit of what you were describing there, which is people not speaking up, competitiveness, there's a lack of safety, and that's where the danger of just focusing on engagement is, and not happiness. And we always say the two that come together. When you get the happiness, it brings that together. So just building a little bit of what you said there. And I got one extra bonus question that I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
You said that you've been in HR broadly for 15 years. If you go back in a time machine to like the first day and meet Hannah 15 years ago, what bit of advice would you give to her?
I think to I think that's a really good question. I think for me, not just to stay at an early stage, not just to stay in my lane, not see, my only function being kind of HR. And again, really getting to understand how the business works outside of my own department, and really understanding the client groups that I was supporting, what was happening. Because I think makes you a better people strategic partner if you really understand what's happening elsewhere. And I think don't view myself as HR in the room.
Yeah,
View myself as, a commercial partner in the business.
I love that, because you started by talking about curiosity, and then you've ended by talking about connecting the dots between all the bits that you find out through your curious journeys.
Yeah.
So, Hannah, this has been absolutely brilliant. I've learned loads, and I just want to finish by saying thank you on behalf of me and our listeners.
Yeah. Really great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.